Vendors are our little agents of emergent coding. The construction of native code only arises as a higher order complexity out of the locally simple interactions between these agents. Basically, all vendors follow some simple rules. They request information, they make decisions, and then they contract other vendors. The main role of a vendor is not one of producing code. That's the higher order complexity. We don't need to worry about that at a local level. A vendor's role is actually one of communications. When a vendor requests information from its clients, it establishes connections with those clients. And when it contracts other vendors as a result of the decisions it makes, it establishes connections with those suppliers. The way these connections are threaded together is very important, as it allows everyone to get in touch in a decentralized way. And it's also important for returning the code. So what is this information a vendor requests? This information is finite, it's discrete, it's not arbitrary, and for this reason we say that the vendor has a finite set of degrees of freedom which it can work within to do its job. A vendor requests this information by requesting access to committees. Now here's where you're probably thinking, what the heck is a committee and why do you call it that? The best way to answer this is just to use an example. So this is an example set of degrees of freedom, or DOFs, for a vendor called compare byte sequence. This vendor will design the code to compare two strings and register the true or false outcome of that comparison using a Boolean flag. Now you're probably thinking, that looks a lot like a library function, but put that thought on hold for a second. This first byte sequence the vendor is requesting is not the actual string it will compare, and this second byte sequence is not an actual string either. Instead, this first byte sequence that the vendor is requesting is the vendor saying, Mr. Client, please make sure you put me in this special byte sequence committee with all the other guys who need this string as part of their designs so that we can design the string ourselves. And the same for the second byte sequence. And the same for the condition. None of these things exist when our vendor is contracted. Instead, the vendor is going to rely upon its client putting it in touch with its peers so that they can decide how that string will be represented and then proceed with their designs. Committees are like the secret weapon of emergent coding. And the cool thing about committees, and the thing that makes them so useful, recursion. Committees contain nested committees, which contain nested committees. Our vendor can actually join a committee and gain access to the nested committees like so, what we call term committees. But the vendor's not done yet. It's requested access to certain committees from its client, it's joined those committees, it's made some decisions, and now it's going to contract other suppliers. Now these suppliers, they request access to their own specific committees for their own specific design purposes. And guess what? The term committees of our own higher level committees can connect right up with our suppliers. What the vendor has done by threading these committees together, we call this a design contribution. The vendor has essentially applied the smarts of its developer owner to a project. Now let's take a step back. This is just a snippet of what a live build can look like, with vendors, contracting vendors, all threading together connections, getting all who need to be in touch for that particular program's design in touch. This supply chain of vendors is different for every build. It's a very large and complex decentralized network created for each program designed by this system. But all a vendor does is simple. It requests, makes decisions, and contracts. It provides a design contribution. Here is a single vendor's design contribution. Here is a single vendor's design contribution. In fact, the program itself is just one design contribution. So hopefully now committees have earned a little bit of your respect. They're the secret weapon of emergent coding, and they're how a guy over here gets in touch with the guy over here without anyone needing the big picture view.